Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and there are a lot of big monsters in the Warhammer fantasy world. Whether you've played Total War or you've played Tabletop Warhammer or hell Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, there are a lot of massive beasts. Now we know of a lot of ones which are fairly common, for example giants, gorgons, cygors, all those usual creatures that we can expect when a Chaos invasion is launched, or by any other means. But did you know that there are actually even larger creatures out there, some of which are much more terrifying than your average dragon? So what we're going to do in this video is discuss some lesser known creatures which are absolutely terrifying. A quick note for this video, I won't be putting up the lore onto the video, mostly because it's very difficult to find a proper digital version of the Monstrous Arcanum. This is the book that I'm using as reference for a lot of this stuff, as I've been building up my Monstrous Arcanum units lately, but don't you worry, I'm going to have loads of images revolving around these great beasts. So without further ado, let's begin. So we're going to start off with the Colossal Squig. This one is a really cool one as it's just absolutely enormous. The strange, improbable, and often quite insane creatures known as squigs are weird half-fungoid, half-flesh beasts that breed and multiply in symbiosis with the greenskins. A brutal and warlike species which includes the orcs and the goblins. Within the mountainous regions of the Warhammer world, the greenskin tribes known as night goblins, by those with the misfortune to have suffered their predations, are particularly adept at the husbandry of these twisted monsters, keeping them deep within the caves and tunnels in which the light-shunning goblins have their lairs. Squigs range in size from small creatures the size of cats up to through the bestial hunting squig and the great cave squigs the night goblins use as dangerous and unstable war beasts, to the feared mangler squig goaded into battle to devour the enemy wholesale. But none of these can match the sheer size of the Colossal Squig, said to inhabit the depths of the Grey Mountains and the vaults. These spherical monsters are of staggering size and possess insatiable appetite, no more in essence than impossibly large fleshy maws stubbed with a row after row of scimitar-bladed teeth. These beasts are near impossible to direct, let alone train, and the Night Goblin Shaman must resort to drugged up meat, often live and unfortunate goblins from their tribe, to make them barely manageable, or hugely potent spells powerful enough to overcome the barely conscious instincts that propel these behemoths on a path through the underworld, eating any tasty morsel regardless of shape and size that crosses their path. So, when it comes to these things, first up what you need to know is on the tabletop, any big creature, even the squig himself, which, come on, he's adorable, and he's absolutely huge as a proper unit, they were kind of useless, mostly because Games Workshop's idea of creating these creatures, the rules were just never good for anything on a monster base, but lore-wise these are incredibly destructive, they're absolutely massive, and you know, they'd be fast too, because they are still the squigs, so they, in theory, should be able to move around the battlefield very, very quickly. What's very interesting is we barely hear about them in lore. Well, a lot of these creatures are actually very lesser known, but you'd think that the Night Goblins would make better use of these gigantic, colossal squigs, especially as the Grey Mountains are more of a contested region. But you never know, maybe they're just preparing. Maybe they've got them slumbering right below the depths of the Cracks there, ready to unleash them when the time is right. Next, we're going to move on to the Basilisk, another creature from the Monstrous Arcanum, found in the most treacherous regions of the known world, from the Bloodspine Mountains of the unknown Southlands to the Grey Mountains that shoulder the Empire. Basilisks are creatures so inimical to life that they poison the very ground they walk upon. They are a living blight that can swiftly reduce an area to ruinous wasteland, decimating crops and slaughtering livestock with venom that suffuses both their body and spirit. Despite their might, basilisks are a reclusive menace, preferring to skulk in the cover of forests and hills, allowing their noxious presence to poison their prey from afar before appearing to feed. Their huge bodies are covered by brightly covered scales, from the membranous fins upon their heads to the tip of their long tail, a warning of their venomous nature. They prowl on about 8 reptilian legs and move so swiftly that they're able to run down and kill even the quickest of prey. In dense terrain, they rely on their poisonous aura to clear foliage that might otherwise obstruct their charge, whilst their long claws finish off prey weakened by the poison they emit. So powerful is their venom that it infuses the basilisk's very being, so that when brought to bay by hunters and struck, it will corrupt and destroy the blades set against it. The most potent weapon in the basilisk's arsenal is their deadly gaze. Renowned in folklore across the old world for its lethal nature, the basilisk's sickly pale eyes are able to focus the destructive potential of their poisonous soul, withering their prey until its skin and flesh slough away. It is the dark renown of the basilisk's gaze that ensures that when the great storms of magic descend and binding scrolls are empowered once again, many a wizard will eagerly seek to call them forth and unleash them upon a hated foe. So these are really cool, and by the way, with this video we're going to be talking about stuff that I don't really talk about too much, so we're not going to talk about the Dreadmore, as that's obviously something that we talk about with Koresh, but these creatures are just really cool. I love the models. Ever since I saw them, I was like, wow, this is so different. Because obviously when you think about a basilisk, you think about a snake. But this is just creepy, right? You can see, even despite different paint jobs, you can see the foul kind of aura it emits. I really like these creatures. There has been known to be undead basilisks, by the way. There has been known that they've been able to be resurrected. So you can imagine a vampire count or a necromancer using one of these dead, rotting creatures that already are very volatile, and then just adding a little bit of extra oomph to it. It's a shame these creatures weren't really explored on too much, but they do actually end up appearing in different novels and have returned for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, so it's a great thing. It's likely that we'll see more of these creatures in the future through different entries. Next, we're going to talk about the Cursed Etin, a creature that I'm really fond of, and you might think it's a giant, but it's actually not. It's a different type of creature, which, yeah, it's so weird because they're based in Norska, which is why I was like, oh, Norska getting giants and not Ettins. That's kind of weird. But let's just jump in and read the lore. Even amid the troll-haunted, chaos-tainted waste of Norska, few creatures are as feared and hated as the Cursed Etin. Renowned in dread Norscan saga and tale, the twin-headed Cursed Etin are terrors of the high moorlands and mountains of the Northlands, dwelling in lonely caverns and furlongs and shattered fortresses. Daubed in the blood of their former owners, hulking, twisted creatures, these towering monstrosities are easily distinguished from the more commonplace lumbering giants of the old world by their singular deformalities and their cruel intellect, although they share both their size and great hunger for flesh. Believed to be a single scattered clan, the Cursed Etin shun even the company of their own, and if the dark tales of the chaos-worshipping tribes are believed to be true, they never die, save by great violence done to them. Although they have clearly been touched by the mutating hand of chaos, each Cursed Etin shares certain warped traits, carrying their stigma as a curse under whose torment they are bound eternally to suffer, and despise all that walks and crawls in the world, but save their vilest enmity for the chaos gods who made them. The Cursed Etin's origins is lost in the tides of blood and time, but many stories speak that they were once men, not giants, and theirs is a curse born of a foolish pride, treachery and bargain with dark and fickle powers. The Cursed Etin's bloodline was headed in those ancient times by their warlord king, Jorundir, who bargained with the demons of chaos for might and power for him and his lot. And many were their victories with their power, brought in coin of blood and sacrifice. According to the sagas, as Jorundir's glory grew, so too did his pride, until at last, in hubris, he refused the call to a long-prophesied invasion of the Southlands, betraying his demonic lords to conquer the lands of those instead, who had paid heed to their call to war, treachery ravaging the length and breadth of Norska, ransacking chaos altars, and bringing back his prisoners as thralls. Thus were the Chaos Gods angered, and their cruelty was visited on Jorunga, and his kin 100-fold. I'm likely butchering his name, and I do apologize if there's certain cuts here. There's a strike going out right next to me, and It's just very loud. Anyways, Jorondir and his descendants kept the might they so craved, but in horrible form. Cursed now to be riven of soul and twisted of body, fused kinsman to kinsman, greater and lesser locked in an eternal struggle for mastery of this new form. They were terrible to look upon, and denied the blessed mindless oblivion of spawndom. Driven from Norsca's towns and villages, they learned to hate all that lived and their works, for they only served to remind them of what they had lost. Over time, as they grew in hatred, they grew too in size, and those that survived the terrors of the lands became a terrifying race of giants, bitterest of all monsters under the shadow of the dark gods. So these are really cool. Because, yeah, it's an Etin, we know about these in general folklore and stuff, but they can also be spellcasters too. This is why I kind of liked the idea of them. Not only that, but they had a lot of options, so you can make loads of different types of Etins. The magics that were commonly used on the tabletop, it was only like a level 1, by the way, wizard, but they had Shadow, Death, and Beast, so you could play around. The idea is... it's just so cool. We know that these are found in Norsca, so it can be assumed that Norsca in the future, should they get a DLC, which we're expecting, could get one of these creatures as a big monster. Yes, it's another giant, but it's a spellcasting giant, so it kind of adds to a little bit more flavor. Just in general, they're awesome. I just love these things. Sure, they're not great to look at, but sometimes it's just fluff, which makes models even cooler. We're going down to the lands of Nehekara for the Khemric Titan. Now, this one's going to be a pretty interesting one because, unfortunately, the model never existed. This was a big issue with Games Workshop back in the day, where they would introduce stuff, really cool things, and you could imagine that models were actually getting made, but unfortunately just never got released, which is a massive shame. But there's some really cool lore. So beneath the shifting and endless sands of Nehekara dwell age-old secrets and timeless horrors to freeze the soul of any who dare disturb their slumber, and many are the legends and whispered tales that are gathered about them. Of these, and the most fabled and feared, is that of the gigantic scarabs and carrion beetles said to dwell beneath the sands, while there are those who scoff at stories of scarabs the size of fortress keeps, raising up wrathful sandstorms against all who intrude upon the ancient lands of the Tomb Kings of Khemri. There are those few beyond the lands of the dead who know that a terrible truth lies behind them. Known to the lore masters of Talia and the Empire as Khemric Titans, these giant scarab arcane constructs of stone and onyx, bejeweled and enameled with the wealth and glory of a bygone era, tower above even the dreaded Necrosphinx in size, animated by the mightiest incantations of the fallen glory of the South. It is unknown how many were fashioned in ancient days, and how many even of those likely few have survived, but it is known that they were set to slumber as guardians far away from the funeral armies of their kings of old, set to stand watch over the sites of terrible evil and the haunts of foul monsters from the dawning of the world. And there are few forces or creatures able to contest them in battle. The root of their great power stems from the fact that they are no mere beast of animate stone, for contained within a Khemric Titan is the resting place of a long-dead hero of Khemri, and sometimes, more rarely, an entire dynasty of warrior kin, fallen satraps of the great kings who were heroes while they drew breath, sworn to guard the borders of their lord's domains in death as they were in life. The funerary incantations of these shrines of eternities are lodestones for the winds of magic, gathering and storing their tremendous power over the years. And when the winds of magic grow tempestuous, they flare into life, and unbidden by any lich priest, the Khemric Titans walk. So these are really cool, right? You can get like something absolutely massive for the Tomb Kings, which, let's be honest, is kind of needed, and it looks absolutely amazing, the little artwork that we do have of these creatures. It's kind of curious, right? Because they're there to basically hold off anything that was like primordial evil, so it can be assumed that a lot of big creatures that survived the coming of the old ones and so on, that might have gotten chaos corrupted, maybe were causing too much of a problem, and the ancient Nehekarans needed something to hold them back. It could have also been early superstition, as back in the day, superstition was a very big thing with the Nehekarans. Either way, for them it was better to be safe than sorry, and clearly now they have a very powerful weapon to be able to use and destroy anything that comes in its path. Again, not great on the tabletop. you had to make one yourself, which was even worse. But impressive. Definitely very, very impressive. We're going to talk about the Shard Dragon now, and there's going to be a few dragons mentioned in this video, mostly because the Monstrous Arcanum did bring in a few which were very, very cool. So, deep within the mountains of the Old World dwell the creatures known to myth as Shard Dragons. Enormous serpentine beasts, shard dragons prowl the black depths of the world, stalking their prey in the abject darkness, pulling themselves silently over rock and shale on disturbingly prehensile, slicked, clawed arms. Their pale flesh is covered by long, jagged scales, each razor-edged and wickedly pointed. Coated in blood and decaying viscera, these protective plates are as much a weapon as a defense, slicing flesh and puncturing the armor of those foolish enough to confront such creatures in battle. Those subterranean terrors are renowned among the dwarfs for their stubborn, unyielding ferocity, and against the bestial kind are many entries in the Great Book of Grudges, roll credits, lodged. Shard dragons will attack almost anything they encounter, from the hulking, white, bloated fungoid slugs that swim the lightless sea of the Under-Earth, to the heavily armored dwarf mining crews that brave the deeps in search of Gromril, and lay waste to all. If any shard dragon manages to break into the subterranean domains found closer to the surface, be they dwarf, skaven, or goblin construction, they will reave bloody murder and glut themselves on flesh until slain, or they slink back into the depths, their bellies full. Creatures as much living nightmare as bestial predator, there are those lore masters that claim that shard dragons are not true dragons as such, but the devolved remains of some draconic offshoot that migrated into the dark heart of the world. Untold centuries in the lightness umbra have filled them with malign power and distorted their forms, and some are now venomous enough that they burn the very rock beneath them, while others are able to exhale the vaporous essence of soul-destroying terror to silently slay their prey. And should they be overmatched and injured, the shard dragon will explode into a murderous rage that few creatures can survive. It was the dwarfs that first returned these creatures to the light of the sun, having learned to bind the shard dragons with powerful runic collars and turning them upon their foes to rend and tear. Learning of their power, ambitious wizards, now long dead, soon created binding scrolls so that they could harness the shard dragon's strength. And yeah, awesome creature. I mean, the lore is pretty interesting. Sorry there were a little bit more cuts there, but there's a lot of background noise happening. But yeah, absolutely amazing. Clearly a really cool monster that the dwarves could have access to, because we know that they can bind them with the collars. And just in general, I mean, it's a subterranean dragon beast. I absolutely love them. They can't fly, as far as I've seen from their rules, but they can hit very, very hard. Not great in terms of stats, though, I must admit, and their attacks are pretty random, but then again, this was the Monstrous Arcanum, which was just kind of weird in general. Yeah, I don't even know if this ever got mass-produced, in all honesty. Next, we're going to talk about the Praeton, and these are actually one of my favorite creatures for the Warhammer universe, mostly because they just look kind of cool, right? So, Praetons are a savage and hateful breed of creatures that haunt the forested lands of Bretonnia, so renowned is their ferocity that sightings of Praetons will draw knights from many miles around seeking to prove their valor by slaying the beasts. Mighty and winged creatures of chaos, hybrid in form like the Chimera, Praetons bear upon their vaguely equine heads a pair of blackened and serrated antlers, which have caused foolhardy knights to mistake them for majestic great stags, much to their error. These beasts, possessed of a dark cunning, will lure such knights into the depths of the forest before revealing their blood-red eyes and rows of savage fangs, when they leap forth from ambush to rend and tear their prey. The hides of Praetons are torn and mutilated, their fur hanging lank and in many places, sloughed away to be replaced by ragged feathers or scales. Their forelegs and body resemble a dark and twisted stag, while their hindquarters sprout clawed leonine paws and monstrous wings like those of a terrible black eagle. Whilst their appearance is truly vile, it is the legendary malice of the Praetors that make them truly dangerous. Corpses mauled beyond recognition, and stretches of forest befouled and trampled betray their presence. Anything foolish enough to enter such an area will be hunted down and slain, and often the Praetors will simply discard the torn corpse to rot, killing out of pure hatred rather than hunger. Dark legends has it that this terrible hatred was born long ago when Beastman Shaman created them in horrific rituals, corrupting great stags before sacrifice-strewn herdstones. Bereft of their once noble nature, Praetors now know only an all-encompassing hatred for that which they have lost, driving them to rend and kill with terrible malice. Even their own wounds bring them a twisted sense of satisfaction, instinctively realizing that only in death will their torment end. I absolutely love these creatures. They're some of the coolest models I've ever seen. In general, just really special. And let's be honest, the Beastmen did need something kind of cool. Manticores and all that type of stuff are cool in terms of chaos in general, but this is a flyer that the Beastmen would have really had something kind of awesome in their army book. They were kind of cheap too for a monster, right? 165 points. Weapon skill was actually 5, strength was 5. Their stats were genuinely decent. And the fact is that since you could actually have them fly about and so on, they were actually good. Yeah, I know, it's surprising. One of the few monsters that I'd actually say are decent enough to use on the tabletop. It's a shame that it was only tied to the Monstrous Arcanum, but I do know some tournaments which would allow these big creatures to be used by players if they so wanted to with their respective army books, anything that kind of made sense. And yeah, we desperately need these in lore. We need these in Old World, we need these in Total War. It's just one of my favorite creatures. I look at them and I smile because they're just so cool. Next is another dragon, and a very rare one at that. One of the coolest models too. As you can imagine, I absolutely adore the Monstrous Arcanum because it introduced a lot of really cool stuff. And this is the Warpfire Dragon. Let's read over their entry. Thankfully a rare sight in the Old World, Warpfire Dragons are hateful and ruinous creatures. Their long charred black bodies twist and undulate, throwing off disturbing patterns of baleful fire as they move, never still, constantly twisting and shuddering as if tortured eternally by unseen blades. Clusters of strange crystal mar their scaled skins, and each individual hosts its own affliction and minor deformalities of limb and hue, hinting their exotic and corrupt origins. The very air around Warpfire Dragons throbs with tainted power, shriveling plants and burning the very ground their claws touch. When brought to battle, the energy caged within Warpfire Dragons works upon their foes foolish enough to close with them, leaving each a burning carcass in its wake. When unleashed, its breath is like no other dragon's, a coruscating blast of scintillating red-black lightning that burns their victims in all-consuming flames, scorching even spirits and creatures of magic. Warpfire Dragons fuel their destructive powers and maintain their tortured bodies by devouring pure warpstone, turning their bodies into vast vessels of arcane power. Only the mighty constitution of a dragon can withstand the effect of so much concentrated energy and chaotic taint without ripping itself to pieces. This is a bit of a weird part of lore because we do know of Chaos Dragons which are basically just corrupting themselves as often, but hey, it's still cool. Although upon their violent death, the loss of control often leads to a spectacular and explosive end to these dragons' marauding. The scarcity of warpstone in the Old World frequently leads the Warpfire Dragon into conflict with the Skaven, assaulting their fortresses and digging out their burrows to get to their hoards of tainted stone. Although some will seek out the inhabitants of the Chaos Wastes, or the dark holdfasts of the Restless Dead in search of prey, or at least to devour creatures themselves tainted with foul magics to sustain them. It is also by the promise of this most powerful and most malignant of materials, warpstone, that insane and arrogant wizards bargain with Warpfire Dragons for their might in battle. for it is said that these beasts are too quixotic and factious even for the great binding scrolls to alone contain. While their strange hunger to some points to their true origin, the blasted southern wastes of chaos, a region legendarily inhabited by demons and littered with the warpstone-laden debris of Morsleep's wrath. No warpfire dragon has ever been sighted by any that have survived. That rivals the great size of the old world's Emperor Dragon, though such monstrous creatures may exist somewhere in the trackless and unknown southern wastes, while the myths of far-off Cathay hold tales of demon dragons of the south, which may be one and the same to them. Some scholars theorize that some blasted region far away from the sight and knowledge of man may be dominated by these great worms, grown to such massive proportions on the glut of unharvested warpstone that they may rival the legendary Kalganus the Black in size. If this were true, it would explain why many of the younger warpfire dragons make the long and arduous migration to the old world, escaping a land ruled by these terrifyingly powerful creatures. So yeah, demon dragons, essentially. Well, mutated dragons, but very close to the cusp of demonhood. They're not chaos dragons. This is a big thing. They're not actually chaos dragons, but rather something that dwells in the fine line between both. And I think that's actually kind of interesting, especially since even Cathay has some sort of, yeah, we know that they exist, we acknowledge them, and that's always really curious, considering that Cathay didn't really get a lot of mentions back in the day in lore. I still have the theory that one of these dragons could actually be one of the dragon children and has its own brood in a sense. I could be wrong, obviously, but you never know, really. And for our last one, we have the Magma Dragon. These ones are super cool. Primordial and vicious creatures, Magma Dragons are amongst the most malignant and reclusive of their kind. Squat, heavily armored monsters whose bodies radiate foul heat and whose obsidian claws can split stone with ease. They dwell in the volcanic ranges of the Darklands and the shattered, smoldering peaks of the Black Spine Mountains, and have long become one with the fiery environment, venturing forth from their smoke-filled dens only to hunt. Their favoured prey is great beasts such as a manticore or a chimera, although they will deign to devour the flesh of lesser creatures such as elves and men if they must. Only when the storms of magic raise, or they arrogantly wish to avenge themselves on some perceived slight, do magma dragons come forth and slay and destroy. One such magma dragon was Hagdar, Scourge of the Darklands, who is one of the oldest dragons to exist in that desolate and polluted wasteland. Once a fire dragon, he was taken captive many centuries ago by the Chaos Dwarfs of the Tower of Gorgoth. Binding him securely with chains made from enscrolled iron, the Sorcerer Lords turned him into a living vessel capable of sustaining possession by a demon. Their experiments undoubtedly a forerunner to those that would eventually create the Chaos Dwarf Kedai. Hagdar eventually escaped his bounds and wreaked a terrible vengeance upon the Chaos Dwarfs, destroying much of the Tower of Gorgoth and its surrounding slave encampment in a ferocious assault. The Magma Dragon is rarely seen now, and only ventures forth from his lair below the Ashridge Mountains when challenged by some rival beast or summoned to war by mighty wizards. When he does fly forth, the Chaos Dwarf patrols who keep a wary eye on him have observed that his once white-hot flesh is now turning in places to grey, lifeless stone. It will be many years before the terrible curse he shares with the sorcerers of that dark race subsumes Hagdar completely, and until then, the massive slave caravans replenishing Gorgoth's still depleted workforce continue to stay well clear of his lair. So there's actually a few different magma dragons known in the world. Hagdar is only just one of them. It's actually quite interesting to see that the curse that actually affects the Chaos Dwarfs is also affecting the dragons, because yeah, the dragons are kind of magical by nature, but they're not chaos tainted and they're not really resistant to magic to that degree. So it's really curious. I love them. I think they're really, really cool. One of the coolest models that you can get your hands on, though it's going to cost you a good £300-400, sometimes £5, if you're trying to find one of these nowadays. But it shows that there are a lot of vicious creatures, very terrifying creatures that you barely hear anything about. Now, we didn't cover the Incarnate Elementals because I believe that they deserve their own video in the future, and obviously I didn't really cover the Merworm because we know a lot about the Merworm. Hell, they're technically in Warhammer 3 because of the Pirate Coast story and all that type of stuff, but yeah, they're not really a thing. We just have to wait and see in the future when the Sea Patrol army comes out for a DLC, because that's where we expect a proper Merworm unit. But yeah, today I wanted to talk about some big monsters as I'm actually going through my Forge Vault stuff, seeing what needs repairs and all that because of moving and all the different stuff over the years. But yeah, let me know what you think about the monsters. What monsters do you think should have been mentioned that might have not been mentioned? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and let's start a bit of a discussion. And until then, I'll see you all again very, very soon, guys. You have a good day.